Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends. And today we're going to talk to an older friend and a brand new friend who I'm just meeting today, and I'm so excited. Both of them are editors. They've both edited for quite a lot of wonderful television shows, and I'm so excited to talk about this with them and with you because I know nothing about editing. I started out, like as an actor and as a singer. So my wonderful friend, and we'll talk about how we became friends, Valerie Summey, and her friend and my new friend, Frank McGrath. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing well, thank you.
So let's talk about editing, because the thing is, I as a producer, because I've done a lot of producing, and we're working on a new show that Valerie's actually been helping us with. One of the things I've been hearing every time I've been working with the folks on this show is, we'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in post. So I can't wait to learn about what happens in post and why that's a misnomer.
I don't know that it's a misnomer. It is true. I mean, it's the final post-production is the final phase of everything coming together. It is a lot of problem solving and fixing everything. I think that is accurate.
My husband, who is also an editor, once compared it to making the turd shine like gold, because you are
Well, that's what I kind of always thought, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's a turd, it's a turd. And you have to fix the turd.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this. Like, as an editor, are you usually, so talk to me, let's just start with Valerie. Talk to me about, just tell the audience about what you've done. Let us know all about what you've done.
Yeah, that's me. You must be wondering how I got here. I started out in this business as an AE, working for a friend who was already editing full time, and an
AE means associate editor, yes.
Assistant editor, yeah, assistant. And some assistant editors don't like the AE term, but to me, I'm an assistant editor. It's efficient, you go with the efficient AE. But I started out as an assistant editor. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And currently on my recent show, I got the bump, and I'm now animatic editing on a cartoon show called Solar Opposites. And so that's been a real change, but
it's a really fun show, by the way. I like it.
I really enjoy working on it. So thank you. It's a lot. It's always easier. It always makes our job easier being given, fine fleshed out products. But there is a bit of that, oh, well, this doesn't quite work, but we can work some magic and make it, look a little bit like it was intentional, or like it was, and one of my favorite examples is, I forget the name of the movie, Alexander, where they overexpose some film or something, and the whole final act is bright red, and they just went that was totally a choice.
Wow, yeah, another classic example is the movie Jaws, which became this monumental hit and changed American movies forever, and got Steven Spielberg all these accolades, and it's because the shark didn't work and they ran out of money, and they had to make this. And the editor, he worked with a very experienced editor. I mean, this is like Steven Spielberg's second movie, so the editor basically fixed his movie, which was going to be a failure because they couldn't use the shark footage. So they, made it Hitchcockian, and that made it like elevated it from like a B, like, oh, it's just a shark movie, to this masterpiece of American cinema. And that's all due to fixing it in post.
How did they do that?
Well, so they built the suspense and tension of not seeing the shark. What they wanted was, you're going to see the shark throughout the whole movie, and it was going to be bloody, and you're going to see the shark get its victims, and the mechanical shark just wouldn't work. So they didn't have what they thought from script through pre-production of, we're going to get all this footage and we're going to edit it together, seeing this scary shark. It's like, well, we don't have anything to use. So they leaned into this sort of suspenseful, like, well, what you can't see, your imagination will fill in. And they made it a very tense movie. They made it they elevated it, I think, artistically, because they didn't have what they were expecting to have in the edit. By doing that, it became one of the biggest movies of the 1970s. And
does that happen a lot in editing? Like, does that happen a lot? Like where, okay, this is what's in the script, and this is what happens during principal photography, and it's like, oh, we didn't get all of this, so make it happen.
Yes. I mean, I can only speak to the stuff I've worked on, and like, sure, yeah, that's I would imagine everything, having gone to film school, and my kind of like falling in love with movies and going to film school was all predicated on like these filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick and the Coen brothers, who are like this auteur theory of, they're notorious for like the single vision of this one person telling a story, and and maybe that's the case in those kind of examples, but the reality is it's just kind of a mess. Making a movie is a mess. Making a TV show is a mess. It's like all these moving parts. What's the analogy? Like, you're building the plane as you're flying it. Yeah. And you're just going into it with the best intentions. Like, well, we got it, and you might have a script that isn't there yet. Well, that happens so much. Like, the script's like good enough, we just got to make the thing. Or you have a really good script, but there's so many variables and factors you can't control because it's such a giant machine. It's all, you're on locations, you're dealing with all these different actors, and you're dealing with all these things that can go wrong at any moment. Then once you get to post-production and you're in the edit, you are constantly making adjustments for something that maybe didn't go as to plan. So I can tell you, everything I've ever worked on has had that. I would imagine you could ask that of any editor, even if you ask the people that edited Star Wars. I'm sure things didn't go to plan, and they just had what they had, and that's where the talent of your crew comes in, to kind of like pivot and make the best of what you have.
Point about the scripts, like oftentimes on television, especially in animation, you'll start on the first few episodes, and your final episodes aren't even finished writing. Like, they have drafts, but they're not even they're not fully fleshed out and ready to shoot yet. So those things sometimes get rushed, and they aren't fully prepared on the day on set. They miss an insert shot, or they don't get the setup quite the way they wanted to, and that all falls on post to kind of clean up and work with the directors and producers to get it the way they originally envisioned it, or as close to as possible.
I'm not going to name the shows because there's a little bit of telling tales outside of school, but two of the hardest jobs I've ever had were two fairly recognizable shows. Both at this point were for streamers. And one of them, it's a classic example of, there's just the things that happen behind the scenes. Not everyone gets along. Not only does, with the best of intentions, things don't go to plan. Well, sometimes people just don't get along. I worked on a show for Amazon that was a fairly large budget show, and they had two showrunners. One of them was the creator of the property, and one was brought in to work with the other showrunner. And I get brought in as an editor close to production, and they've had they've had pre-production. They had the writer's room set up where the idea was, okay, we want 12 episodes. Write the 12 episodes, have your scripts done, get into pre-production, and then we'll shoot them. Well, I join the show right before production starts, oblivious to anything that has been happening. I get into the edit room my first day, and we're editing in Los Angeles. The writer's room was in Los Angeles. The show is shooting in New York. And I find out, because there's still a couple of writers that are around, which still didn't mean anything to me. And I start talking to one of the writers in the kitchen. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be here. The writers' room is supposed to be done like weeks ago." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, what's going on?" He's like, "We have one script." "Oh, we have like two scripts." I'm like, "Oh, what do you mean?" He's like, "We didn't we didn't write the show. They got to shoot." Like, "Well, what happened?" It's like the two showrunners didn't ever see eye to eye. They basically spent the writer's room bickering. And the story I was told was there, and this is TV. It's a little different than a movie. So you have a writer's room. It's staffed with different. So there's a hierarchy. There's producer writers. There's staff writers. There's maybe even like PAs that might be like on the writing staff. The two showrunners would start the day, they'd be together, they'd get in a fight, they would go to their offices, and then the rest of the day would be each one picking people from the conference room to come in and keep the argument going. And this is a VFX heavy show. Again, it's shooting in New York. So the idea was, okay, you'll be done with the writer's room. We'll have 12 strips. You guys go to New York and shoot. And then the editors will be in LA and we'll edit the show in LA. And maybe you guys will fly back and forth every once in a while. But like in TV, the showrunners don't need to necessarily be tied to set. They can pop in and out and you have a producer that's tied to the set in New York. But because they didn't finish the scripts, and this turned into one of the most difficult jobs I've ever had, they had to start shooting in New York and write the show. Like I was editing episode 5 and they were still writing episodes 7 through 10. So they're having an impromptu writer's room in my edit bay. Like we're trying to watch episode 5. I've got like 8 writers behind me trying to finish the next scripts that are going to start shooting in a few days. And because it was a VFX heavy show, like this was new for Amazon and the history is from animation. I'm sure I'm saying enough that someone can piece together the show I'm talking about. But so we didn't do this. We didn't even do this. They didn't have scripts, and we didn't even have the time to do the steps that you would do previs. Like you would take complicated action sequences, and you would do what's called pre-visualization. So you would kind of have these like this very sophisticated animatics or storyboards that are moving and they have motion and like figure out how. And you would still change it. Like they do those on. I know they do them on Marvel shows, and they'll still recut and reshoot.
Really, really rough VFX.
Yeah. Yes, and we didn't even have those. We didn't even have finished scripts, and so it was just that. I guess my point there. That's the point of that story. Is like, I mean, that was just an ongoing ball. Like it just snowballed to like the worst possible scenario, and it all funneled into the edit room, and everyone had to fix it in post.
So my question for you is that exciting and interesting for you, or is it when that happens? Is it like, God damn it? Like
that particular experience was traumatic.
It can be a little bit of both though, because the edit sessions are oftentimes like where your higher ups hash out your story, and that's a big part of how the editors influence the final product is like being in that room and having some control over what goes on the final video.
Sure. I mean, I also was a new father. I had a 1-year-old at home. Fortunately, at that time, my wife wasn't back to work yet. And there was a week where we had to work like 16-hour days. We were working weekends. There was a week where I'm like, I'm going to have a heart attack at this Avid station. That was a level of, I'm very frustrated that this is allowed. Like this goes, for me, that went into the territory of the toxicity of Hollywood of like, yes, it's not like Harvey Weinstein situation, but it's like, this isn't how professional workplaces are supposed to run. No one should be allowed to operate a high-end multi-million-dollar workplace like this.
And
that being said, I've been on shows where it's not that bad, and it's like, you're puzzle. It's like a puzzle you're solving. Like I've seen things like, I'm like, oh God, this is a mess. How are we ever going to figure this out? And it's like, in the right circumstance, it's like, oh, we all worked together and we figured it out, and wow, that was amazing. And especially,
can I tell you though? Like I have worked for every single major studio except for Paramount, and what I found is that all of the studios are shit shows.
Oh, sure, yes.
you come in thinking like, oh, this is insert studio here.
Yeah.
This is gonna be the most amazing. They have their stuff together. They have their, and it never is. And that was probably the biggest shock to me when I entered the studio system.
Sure. I will say personally, and I will name a name here. I worked on a New Line film, and that was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. That was a great company.
The greatest job I ever had was working for Time Warner
Oh,
before Discovery bought them. That was the greatest. They had their stuff together. Everything was amazing. And like, there will never be another moment in time in this world. And that's over now that Discovery bought them, but there will never be, like, that was everything. Warner, HBO, Turner, that was a great moment in time.
Hey, I was thinking, I like pulled out some old swag, and I'll name a show here, but Man Seeking Woman, I never got more and better swag than I did from Man Seeking Woman. They gave me such good swag. Like, I have a jacket, an umbrella, like a bag. Like, I got like so much cool swag from them, and I was like, thanks guys. I still remember it years later. Like, good job.
Valerie, so tell me, how did editing become a thing? Because like, I think about how I came into the business. Like, when I was a kid, like, I did like modeling, catalog modeling, and I did like musical theater and such. And in my mind, and maybe, but in my mind, most people come in as a performer, like, oh, I'm gonna be an actor, oh, I'm gonna be a singer, oh, I'm gonna be a this. How did you go into editing?
You want the honest answer. I came into this business like, well, I can make pretty good money off the bat if I go straight to editing, and then I won't just in the trenches for too long. Because it is one of the positions that pays pretty well, and that was like, as a pragmatic young child, that was something that I was drawn to. And I watched a lot of behind the scenes back in the day growing up, and I was like, man, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things behind the camera, and like, I have love for performers. Like, they're great. They really, they make the piece at the end of the day oftentimes, but there's so much going into it that you don't see. And I found a love for those people in just like finding out what goes on in the background.
Yeah, when you were a little kid, like watching movies and stuff, did you want to go into the business, and were you like,
oh yeah I was right in that generation of kids that watched every single moment of the behind the scenes footage of the Lord of the Rings, and I was like, I want to little did I know it would be mostly like sitting in a dark room waiting for people and rendering.
How about you, Frank? How did you, what made you, what enticed you into this world?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, just watching. I mean, my wife and I joke about this a lot. We had baby boomer parents, so they just let us watch TV all the time. I fell in love with movies at a young age. That was like a thing we just did as a family. I loved, especially growing up in the 80s, anything Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. And then when I got to high school, as I got older though, like in middle school and high school, I started like, and this was a lot, just even encouragement from my parents. Like, then I started getting into like Stanley Kubrick and the Coen brothers and all the like slightly more adult stuff. And then when it came time for college, I initially was going to study music, and I tried to do that and it just didn't work out. And
what were you playing? What did you play? That was what I studied in school.
There's actually a lot of music. There's a lot of musicality to editing, and there's a lot of like, you'll find a lot of editors have a background in music. I played bass guitar, and I was going to try to like, I knew the whole thing with music was like, I wanted to go to college. My parents wanted me to go to college. And there was like,
you didn't want to study finance.
Right. Well, but I was going to study, like, I was going to learn upright bass and like essentially at the collegiate level. I'm going to be a bass guitarist. Like, I got to learn upright bass and learn jazz or classical. And I tried to do that, and I just didn't. I just don't think I had the talent to go that far. But someone who I met when I was like 19, who's been one of my best friends for 25 years, he was a film student, and it was getting to know him and seeing the stuff he was working on. It was like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. And then I went to film school. I moved. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I moved to Chicago. Went to school in Chicago.
That's right.
And of course, what part of the city?
I grew up in Forest Park, so like the seventh west of the city.
Yeah.
Wow.
I went to Columbia College. I bounced around a lot as a child. I grew up in Deerfield, Illinois for a while.
Oh yeah.
I knew Chicago, and then I went to Columbia College. And initially, of course, I was going to be, when I was 20, I'm like, I'm going to be a director. And then once I started going to film school and learning about it, I just gravitated towards editing. I saw that that's where it all came together. And I liked the sort of it's like the final writing of something. Like that's where you really make a movie or a TV show. You really make the piece. And I just, I took editing classes in college, and I knew graduating, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And I didn't like film sets. I just did not like film sets at all. So
there is definitely, like, to your point, a sense of control that comes from editing that you don't get on set, because you're very on set. You have to like let go of your product. You have to give it to somebody else and hand it off. But when you're in the edit bay, there's very much a sense of being a final part in that puzzle that you're putting together.
Yeah.
Are people assholes to editors? Or do people just like throw it to like, yeah, God damn it, what are you doing? Like, are people nasty to editors?
It depends on the people.
Other
editors can be real nasty.
If you're talking about producers and directors, yes. If you're talking about like other crew, they don't know what we do. They don't know. We're like aliens. We're like space aliens that operate some mission control suite. And
there was a show the show that Frank and I worked on together. One of the actors would come by the edit bay and be like, hey, can I see this scene that I did? And like, that's cool. Like, I was like, oh yeah, for sure, no problem. But then there was another actor who would just come by and like say hi and be like, oh yeah, just checking on you guys. And I was like, this guy, I've never seen an actor do that in my life. He ate lunch with the grips. He was just like a total gem. I was like, wow.
To piggyback on Tacoma specifically, but before that, I will say I worked on a show with Henry Winkler.
Okay. Hey, isn't that what Fonz did? Hey.
Yeah, he is the nicest man I have ever met in my life. He's I worked on a show called Children's Hospital for Adult Swim. I know
Children's Hospital, yeah.
I was on that for a few years. I was an assistant editor, then an editor. We used to we worked pretty close to set, so we'd go by for lunch. Henry sat and ate lunch with the crew every single day. He was like the most genuine and nicest man in the world. He bought we ended up shooting the kind of like schedule we had. We would always shoot in winter to spring. So I guess Mardi Gras would happen, and he would always get like king cake. He would get like some like one of the first times I met him, I was on set, and he's like, have you had the cake yet? I'm like, no. It's like, oh, you gotta have this cake. I'm like, but then so when Valerie and I worked on Tacoma, which this is pre-COVID, Valerie and I were on it when COVID hit, and we went remote.
And I left when COVID hit.
And Valerie left. But
wait, so just so I can understand, where did Tacoma air?
It's on True TV and TBS, and it's on HBO Max.
It's still on.
Yeah.
They're going into their
fourth season. The unique thing about Tacoma, they set us up. The editorial crew is set up on set. Now we work remotely now, but for the first 2 seasons, when they shot the show, we were on the set and like next to the grips and like just next to like we didn't shoot on a sound stage. They retrofitted this warehouse company studio to turn it into a fire station, but it was I've never worked that close to the set before, and it was it was a mixed bag, but like there was
great.
It was weird. I mean, I did feel like I had lots of eyes on me, where like, because they don't know what you do. Like, they just like, there's days where like we could come in at 11, it was fine, but it's a set crew. They've been there since 7:30, so like, they're looking like the editor coming in at 11 for? And then there's some days where you can leave at 6, and it's like, it's the editor leaving. He came in at 11, he's leaving at 6, and it's like, dude, I don't ask what you do.
Well, we
But
got crafty.
but that weirded me out a little bit. And then it's also, that was production. Once we get it, especially when Valerie was on the show, when we got into post-production, we were working like 14-hour days. But which is not the case anymore. That shifted. But my point is, like, there was a sort of camaraderie. Like, the cast was really, it was the cool thing about being on set is there was this sort of fun atmosphere, and the cast got to, like, the cast wouldn't know who the editors are until like the wrap party or the premiere.
Yeah.
So like,
Even
they
then
were
they
hanging
talk
out.
to us.
So yeah, that was kind of, that was a fun part of it. But once we switched to working from home, I liked that much more.
I got the chance to meet camera crew people and be like,
Yeah.
hell, you're the person who always forgets to sleep, be camera, whatever. But that's not
Yeah.
not on that particular show. But like, you know, you got to be like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, like, good job, and vice versa. And that was really nice for us.
That's so funny that you say that, Valerie, because like, so you met my friend Sojourner yesterday when we were on the call for the tea. And Sojourner is a writer, and she spent many years working in the soaps, on the ABC soaps, All My Children, One Life to Live. And she would talk about that to me, about, you know, because like the writers are just in their writer's room, but like when she had those moments to meet the actors and to meet that, like, and to be on production, it'd be like, oh my God, like we're like
Suddenly
actually...
everything comes together. Worlds collide. You're like, oh, we're all on the same team. Like, we're like, here. That's what I like.
Exactly. So I'm so curious, because like you and I, so I don't know if you know, Frank, how Valerie and I got to know each other. So we had this social group called Study Group. There was this moment, we were all in Los Angeles, and we were all in between gigs. And so what we did, we all got together like 2 days a week. Was it 2 days a week or 3 days a week? 2 to 3 days a week. And we took turns, and everyone hosted each person, like everyone hosted the group at their place. And we would just get together, and everyone would, like, you know, like say like, okay, we're working on our thing. We're working on this. We're trying to find our next gig or whatever.
Oh, cool.
And it was called Study Group. And that's how the two of us got to know each other. How did you get to, we didn't talk about it. How did you come to LA?
I just came out here to work. I like knew I wanted to edit. I had some, like, I went to school for what they called telecommunications, which sounds like I sell phones, but really like film school basically for me. And I spent a lot of time with some people who, you know, they grades older than me. They'd moved out here, including my now husband. And I knew friends. I crashed couches, and I was like, I just want to come out here and work in the industry. And one of those friends was already editing, and I was like, that's kind of what I want to do. Like, and he was already pretty successful at it. You know, he landed a few pretty good gigs, being like a lead editor. And so I was like, you need an assistant? You want somebody to like help you out who can be clean and organized and timely? Because I can do that. Like, and he took the chance, and he did. And it was great. It was like, you know, I got really lucky, and I owe him a lot too for just getting my foot in the door, kind of pretty straight off the bat. You know, I worked like one or two PA gigs kind of here and there, to pay bills as I needed, and
Yeah.
And then Frank gave me my start as an official editor. Frank was the first person to trust me to give me a session. He was sick, or I can't remember if you were sick.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But,
Well, so like I mentioned, I have now an almost 7-year-old, but like once I had a child, like, and this is, you know, pre-pandemic, of course, like you have a young child, they're sick all the time, and then you get sick all the time. And the first 2 seasons of Tacoma, there was a point, it was by like episode 4. Well, no, I guess it happened in episode 2 on season 2, but it was basically we get to a point and I caught the flu season 1, and then I caught something else. I don't.
You
maybe
caught a
I
really bad flu. You might have had
I got a very bad flu, and the doctor is like, yeah, it's just like, yeah, you're not going to work for 4 days. So Valerie just, yeah, I mean, just necessity. It was like, you're editing with Kevin, our showrunner director.
I had
Gotta get on season 2. And I mean, Valerie and I had talked about this. If Valerie had stayed, I did this for the other assistant that came on, but I was going to help get Valerie like an episode eventually, like help her. Because I started as an assistant editor, and it was very difficult to work my way up. So I kind of,
that move is hard.
yeah. So I was going to like help the plan, because Valerie had already gotten FaceTime essentially covering for me. I was going to help, if she had stayed on, I was going to help her get an episode of her own.
Why is the move from assistant editor to editor so hard? Is it because the producers always just work with the same people, or are editors assholes?
It's mostly that catch-22 of like, you need experience without anyone being willing to give you the experience. Like, nobody wants you to be a first-time editor on their gig. They want you to have already edited something, and unless that's something, it's hard to get the job.
Well, and as frustrating as it is to be on the other end of that, where you're just like, just give me a chance. I get it. Like, these jobs are so, I mean, everyone's asses.
There's a lot of money being on the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you don't want to be the one that made, you never want to be the one that make a mistake. You don't want to be the one who's like, yeah, I thought they could hack it. I thought they could do it. And then you have to explain, like, well, why did you give them a chance why did you have the assistant editor edit? Like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So everyone's afraid to put their necks on the line. There's also, I think, culturally, and I haven't, this is a thing that I kind of assumed is the case, and older editors have kind of reinforced it. Like, back in the old days, pre-digital, especially like if you're talking film and you're cutting film, edit room, there was more kind of mentoring. There was more like hands-on. An assistant editor was way more involved in the actual editing.
Oh, and that's what you were gonna say. Okay, go on.
Well, no, like there is a lack of mentorship that's happened in the digital switch to how we do stuff, that it's just harder. Back in the old days, when there was like you're splicing film, and like editors would actually have the assistant next to them to do the actual cut it, tape it together, give it back to me. You could build that. It was easier for you to build a rapport with the director or the producer. It was easier for that assistant editor to be so embedded in the process that you're building that relationship for someone to say, you know what, I think you're pretty smart. I think you can do this.
Yeah.
You know, in the digital realm, like when we were in person, I'm in my room, Valerie's in her room, and very rarely would you necessarily interact with anyone. It just that everyone's off in their own little spaces, unless you really try to like. And with Valerie, what helped was like, hey, I've got the flu, you're cutting.
Yep. Yeah.
And she gets to spend time with the showrunners, and they're like, you know what, Valerie can do this. I like Valerie.
Yeah.
She's okay.
So with that said, right? Like, you think like the theater, right? Like the theater is an actor's world, and television is like the writer's world. But like with television and film, so much of what as an audience member we see is a result of what the editor does. What is that like? Is there like a nauseating a nauseating like sense of like, oh my goodness, like I can make or break this project, and if I make or break this project, I can never work again? Like what is that like? Because so much of the filmed content is about the edit. Like the edit makes or break it. And I'll say this in the sense of, like coming from like being an actor, like I know like film act, like theater actors come to the set and like they know their they know their lines and they do this or X or that, they do their thing. But people who come up and like people, the talent who are come up in television and film, they don't necessarily come to set knowing their lines. They don't necessarily come they're not necessarily they rely on the edit.
Yeah.
So as an editor, like, do you like have a knot in your stomach 24/7?
I think the first time you probably do, but also it's funny that there's a lot that goes into editing that people just, it's also not all, when people talk about editing, they're also kind of inherently talking about mixing, they're talking about color correction.
The whole post-production process.
There's a whole slew of people involved in the post-production process that people don't understand, like the differences between the jobs. And that part is always kind of frustrating because it's like, you can cut a great product and if your mixer fucks it up, you're kind of like, well, that could have sounded better. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just you. It should never fall on the whole project is a team effort. Like any form of media is a team effort. Like
I will say though, to kind of piggyback on that though, like there is, because I have recently experienced it firsthand, in that I finally got a chance to edit essentially what is a studio film. There is a different level of pressure when you're talking about a film, especially a studio film, and then TV. Like, what's fairly common on feature films is editors get fired all the time. You are the first one, like, because I mean, it's when you talk about movies and you talk about like these memorable, like whatever, The Godfather or a Marvel movie or like a movie that makes a lot of money or a movie that has a cultural impact, that's lightning in a bottle. There are so many movies that are mediocre or just bad, and it's not because the people behind them were not talented. It's just sometimes it just doesn't work out, and the editor on a movie is generally going to be the first one to take the blame before anyone else. So there's a lot of pressure. If you're editing, especially a studio movie, there's a ton of pressure on you.
Which is so strange because it could be anybody's fault. Like it could realistically
could be, but I mean, I'll just be honest. Like the studio wanted to fire me on the movie I worked on. They couldn't. This director said no, it's not his fault. But it's the editor gets blamed a lot.
I will say I worked on a show with a guy who was pretty notorious for that, and like a lot of the show was cut in post, and there was a high turnover of editors on that show because it was like, well, it must be the editor's fault. Like that.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what they even say? Like in unscripted, like don't all the Real Housewives when they like people hate them, they're like, oh, I was edited wrong.
Wow. I mean, in reality TV, I would say, like, because I didn't work in reality, but I worked in documentary, which certainly has a lot of commonality. Like you're crafting the story there, like you're doing editorially, you're making and breaking those.
I was on a reality TV show once, and it was very interesting to see from the other.
Which one?
It was something I can't remember. It was on Sci-Fi. It was something about trailer. We cut a trailer. It was like we were competing against a guy to cut a trailer in a certain amount of time. But it was fun. But it was interesting to see. Like I was there for all the footage they were shooting, and at one point they were like, what do you do here? And I gave them like a long-winded, rambly answer, and they were like, can you just say I record sound? And I was like, I record. Like and it's like I get now why they'd want that, but at the time I was like on set, sweaty, like leave me alone. I don't want to be on camera. But it was interesting to see what the final outcome was, having been on the other side of it. And like reality TV is a whole different ballgame. I've never cut any of that, and I don't want to. Documentaries are a lot like reality in the sense that like. But you have more of a plan usually up front with the documentary, whereas reality, you're kind of waiting for something to happen, I think.
Got it.
But
Got it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to change the course of the conversation. You were talking, Frank.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I was just to kind of chime in on the pressure and the stress. I mean, I think Valerie is. I agree with Valerie. Early on when I first made that leap, I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure and stress. But like in TV, there is less of it in TV than in the feature world, I guess was my point. And I experienced it firsthand in the feature world. It worked out fine for me, but I just know, like, coming up, the way that I came up, and I know other editors that are more in the feature world, or they bounce back and forth. And the thing that was always communicated to me, and I would either the warnings or the sort of like hearing the experiences, is like, features can be rough because they're going to pin it on the editor first and foremost, because they're the easiest. Because once you've shot the thing, and sure, you're going to maybe do reshoots, but once you've shot it and you're in the edit and you're starting to preview it, and you're starting to see, oh, maybe this isn't working, the first person they can blame is the editor. So you do have, and when you're talking about a movie too, like you could be working on a Marvel movie that's a $200 million investment, and now they have multiple, they have more than one editor. They usually have like a team of editors, but you've got a lot riding on your shoulders there.
Yeah. So talk to me about that, because so here's the thing. I'm not a details guy. Like, I'm a big picture guy. I'm like, this is what it should look like. Make it happen. I'm not a details guy. So talk to me about that, because like I can't even imagine, like, so, like you do a movie, right? A movie, they'll do like 12 pages in a day. So you have like 12 hours of footage. That's 7 pages.
Right.
Like, how do you even like?
That's where the AE comes in.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's where the assistant editor comes in. That's where.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you have, depending on the scope, the budget, the type of project, you could have a team. On Tacoma, and I think this started when Valerie was around, we had 2 assistants. We had a night assistant that was helping. Yeah, you have assistant editors that they're the gatekeepers. They're the ones that bring the footage in, and it's on them to kind of organize it and organize the project, and we'll call it the edit room in a fashion so you can sit down and not worry about anything but putting the story together.
The editor, I mean, the goal is for an assistant editor, at least, is for the editor to be able to sit down and read the script and find the footage that they want. Like, the editor should be able to sit down and say, okay, I want a close-up for this line, and find it really quickly. And that's your job.
So do you so that's a perfect example. Like, so you see this line and it's like, oh my goodness, this is the crux of this scene. So are you looking at like 20 different takes of?
Well, that's on the directors and the assistant directors and so forth to plan it,
Well,
no, but I'm just saying, like, so we want this. So do you have to sit like and say, like, I'm gonna watch all 20 takes of this and say, like, this is the moment where this actor did something so amazing that I need this to be for this 2 seconds or whatever?
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. And Valerie and I worked in one of these 2 examples of how you would essentially set up the project. And I worked primarily in comedy. That's Valerie and I worked on a comedy together. So we work in an editing program called Avid. There's a few different editing programs. I won't get into that long diatribe and how you would use one or not. But what Avid does have, which the other ones don't, is we'll call it the script.
They do now.
Okay. Well, so in Avid, there's the version I know. There's a thing we'll call it the script tool, Scripty. Essentially, what you can do is you can take the shooting script, which is a PDF. You can import that into the Avid, and so the kind of information that the edit room gets from set, you get notes. You get script supervisor notes, which is they have a method to kind of put markings and information and notes on the script, and then you get a copy of that. And that's just kind of, in theory, that's supposed to give you, like, because you're not on set, supposed
They mark like how long the take went, and like if there's a mistake in the line or if they went back, they'll tell you what happened in each.
in theory, this isn't always the case, but the director should be also communicating things to, like, oh, I want the editor to know this, or I want the editor to use this take and ignore the rest of it. You don't always get that. But then what we have in Avid, and this is a job that I detested as an assistant editor. Yes, I mean, but as the editor, I cannot work without it. So you get the script in the Avid, and then the assistant editor, Valerie, would take all the footage. So you get we'll call it scene 2. You get all the setups, all the different camera angles, all the footage, and you physically take the script and they become little thumbnails. You take all the takes and you put them visually on top of the script. And they have these lines that kind of pull out from underneath the thumbnail, and you put dots, you put marks. So let's say scene 2 is shot in 4 different setups. It's the master, it's A, B, C setups. And then
master, a 2, an OTS, and an OTS.
And then the scene starts with Mark walks in the door and says, "Hi, Bill." And we have we have 4 setups, and maybe in the setups there's like 3 different attempts at that first line. The assistant editor can lay out all the footage and then start putting markers. So I can click a mark that says, I want to see Mark say, "Hi, Bill," in every single shot I have. And I can see a visual display of that. So I can see what the camera angle, the setup looks like. Then I can go to each line read of that actor. And you can have it, then the rest of the scene kind of flows that way in this visual description. That is very important for comedy. And then you can, if there's improv or alternate readings of a line, you can type in the improv.
Color code.
Yeah. So that's how almost all major comedies, well, most comedies are probably done that way. And then when you have the director or producer sitting with you as the editor, you can quickly see all the performances. The other way that I have worked, and this was when I was an assistant editor on this New Line project, and it was a horror movie. And the director was one of the best directors I've ever seen. He was so thoroughly prepared. That's the other thing. The job as an editor can be made so easy by the amount of preparation that happens before you. And I worked on a movie called Lights Out, a low budget horror movie from like 2015 or 2016. David Sandberg was our director. He was, I think, from Sweden. It was his first movie, first anything in Hollywood. He had a background in animation and visual effects. He was the nicest guy in the world. He was so thoroughly prepared. He would do, because he had this background in animation, and it's a horror movie, so there's less, like, there's no improv, there's no finding it on set. You've got your script, you've got your scares, you shoot it. They didn't shoot a ton of footage. Like on a comedy, you might have hours of footage for one scene. And all I had to do was bring in the footage, and he would have animatics basically for the scenes. He would make them himself, so he would know exactly how to shoot the scene, choreograph the actors, and I'd bring the footage in. And what I was used to at the time was like, oh, I have to get the script in, I got to do all the script sync stuff, script tool stuff. And I saw on that project, it's like, oh no, I just have to bring the footage in. We have all the stuff we need. It's clear. It's done so efficiently. And the editor that I worked with had a way of organizing the bin display and putting in locators that I could simply just organize it in a way that you could just cut a scene in like an hour and then you're done. And for me personally, it was like, oh man, I don't want to work in comedies anymore. This is so much easier.
Horror is, you'd rather work in horror. I love that your editor had a big display that you liked, by the way.
Well, that was going to actually be my question. Do you like it when the director is like, this is exactly what I want, you can do it? Or do you like the ambiguity and being able to kind of use your own creativity to like put it together? Say, look, this is what's happening.
I think every editor is going to have a different answer to this. At this point in my life, I kind of like the director that knows what they want. And
You're like, I want to go home. I got a kid, and
Well,
I gotta freaking.
I think it depends on the project, the director. I mean, it literally depends on the entire situation. Because like, if you have the right project and you're passionate about it, and the director is also passionate about it, but willing to let you like play around with it, then like that can be really fun. But it's also, it is, to agree with Frank, very nice when somebody comes in and says, this is what I want. You're like, great, I can do that for you. That's why I'm here.
So yeah, I mean, so the Tacoma FD, the show that Valerie and I worked on, it's our showrunners are a subset of a comedy troupe called Broken Lizard, and they have a career. They've been around for like 30 years. They've made studio films. Their big movies are like Beer Fest and Super Troopers. I edited, between seasons of Tacoma, I edited a Broken Lizard movie. And one of our showrunners was the director of the movie. And he is that kind of director who knows exactly what he wants, to the point of he's essentially an editor. He could edit this stuff himself if he wanted to. But I found when we did the movie together, like it was nice to have, there was a little bit more of like, I was given the freedom to kind of like have an opinion, and it was a lot more collaborative than I was expecting, where like he very much knew what he wanted and he did a great job. He got all the footage we really needed. It was very efficient, but it was the perfect kind of, it was a perfect situation of like, Kevin knows exactly what he wants and we're going to get what he wants, but he's also very open to the collaborative end of it, of like, well, what do you think, Frank? I mean, this is what I want, but what do you, show me what you want, and like, or this is what I want. I don't know if this quite works. So what do you think? Like maybe what I want is wrong.
Well, there's an interesting dichotomy between the timelines of television and film.
Yes, you have more time than a movie.
Yeah.
Sometimes on television, you're like, I mean, that 1 week to air South Park special or whatever, like sometimes you're in that situation where you're like, we got to put this on television next week. Like, what are we doing? Somebody make a decision.
And you just have to just do it. Well, listen, I would love to continue this conversation, but unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. And I thank you so much for joining us, Valerie, Frank. Is there anywhere that we can find your work, your people, like Valerie, Frank?
Frank, where is Tacoma streaming these days?
HBO Max, and then our movie's called Quasi, and that's going to be on Hulu, I think, in April.
Brilliant, love it. I'm also on Solar Opposites.
On Solar Opposites, which is such a fun show. I really love that show. I think it's so fun. You're like, I do too. Of course you do.
You get some shows that you like and some shows that you don't. And I love this one. It's so fun. And Tacoma was also a fucking barrel of laughs. I love both of those shows. Like,
well, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen out in Radio Land, we have Valerie Summey, we have Frank McGrath. I'm so happy that they could join us. And it's so great to hang out with you again, Valerie. It's been a really long time. And it's been so wonderful for to meet you, Frank. And I can't wait to meet you actually in person. I'm sure we will.
Sure.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode of Jordan Van Haslo, Jordan Van Haslo, for Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo, right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye. Hi there, it's Jordan Van Haslo. Yes, that's right. That Jordan Van Haslo. I don't know if you know this, but everyone's favorite radio show and podcast is now available on Spotify. That's right. Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends, my weekly one-on-one chat with some of the most interesting people I know from the entertainment and the arts communities, can now be streamed on Spotify. That's right. I share real estate with Michelle Obama. Click the link and be sure to subscribe.